Just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I'm just going to tell this sleep meditation in the background. And while I tell this sleep meditation, you can begin to drift comfortably asleep. And I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my voice or to the spaces between my words. And while you fall asleep, you can have a sense of walking through a cave in a mountain. And you can hear the whistling sound of the air passing through the cave, the occasional drip of water. And as you walk along, the light from your torch can glisten and sparkle as it catches some of the water on the walls of the cave, and the footsteps can echo. And you can notice how, as you walk deeper and deeper into the cave, it's almost as if the air pressure begins to change, and you're aware that you're walking deeper and deeper into the mountain. And deep in this mountain, you discover the most elaborate looking door. And it's a curved door with ornate decorations, with precious stones encrusted within the door. And around your neck hangs a key. And you take that key from around your neck, you put it into the door, unlock that door, and carefully push that heavy door open. And as you do, you notice light bursting through from the door, and realize that it's almost like daylight the other side of that door, and yet you are deep inside this mountain. And as your eyes begin to adjust to that light, so you turn the torch off, and you begin to look around and take in what you see. And you notice that it's such a lush looking land, with trees, dense forest, thick grass, wildflowers, the most perfectly blue water running and flowing down through the land, and in the center of the land is what looks like an ice palace, and it's stretching high up into the sky here. And as you look up, you notice that looking up looks like looking up into the sky. There's just a uniform light blue overhead. There's no signs of clouds. And there's no signs of being inside a mountain. And as you look behind you, you can see the walls of the mountain stretching up high overhead. But as they stretch higher and higher, so they seem to become bluer and bluer, until at some point the blueness just merges with the blueness of the sky. And you notice that that ice palace is situated on an island surrounded by a moat. And there's a bridge that leads over to that island. And you can see a village circling around that palace. And so you head down towards the bridge. You find your way down from the cave, down from that door. You find your way down to a road. And you follow that cobbled road. As you walk deeper and deeper inside this mountain, and you walk through the village. You can hear people milling around. You can see people selling things in a marketplace. You can see people arriving back, having harvested crops. People heading off to work out in the countryside. And it's almost as if perhaps this entire mountain chain is somehow hollow, full of this land. And while you walk, you begin to feel warm. You have this sense that it's significantly warmer here inside this mountain than out in the snow, back out on the side of the mountain. And you cross the bridge, and you continue walking up towards that palace. And as you get closer to the palace, so you notice its scale. You notice the way that that palace is towering so high overhead. And you realize that the palace walls seem to be made of ice, and you touch them with your hands as you pass them after you've crossed that bridge. And you can feel the coolness of the walls. You can feel the dampness as the temperature of your hand makes the water, that ice, melt a little. And you head all the way to the entrance to this palace. And as you arrive at the palace, so you can see the water just dripping down around that palace, and then gradually flowing its way, joining the river. And you're curious how this palace lasts, if it appears to be melting. And you knock on the door of the palace. You hear a click, and then that door seems to slide itself open, and you walk in, and it seems to be deserted. And you start looking around. And then you hear some sounds coming from upstairs. So you carefully follow the stairs, spiralling up, checking out the next floor, and then the next floor. And then you head up some stairs past some different doors. You can still hear a noise coming from higher up. And you find a door through which you can hear the noise is coming from. And you open that door and see a narrow spiral staircase. You follow that spiral staircase all the way up. And you find yourself in a bell tower right at the top of one of the peaks of the palace. And you look across, and there's a peak in all four corners. And then in the centre is a tall clock tower. And the bells get rung. And you can see that there's somebody standing in the other three bell towers. And you see that that clock has just struck 12. And the person stood in this bell tower says that they're the Ice Queen, that they're responsible for this palace, this land, but that lately the palace has begun melting. And they don't know why the palace has started to melt. And you head back downstairs into the palace with the Ice Queen, as they explain to you that until recently this palace, made of ice, has been as solid as rock, that's dry to the touch. But recently, it started to melt, and on the outskirts of the land, a desert seems to be encroaching. And you're unsure why this would be. And they ask if you'd be willing to go and investigate. That they have to stay here, watching over the town. So you agree to investigate. You say that you'll visit the desert. You leave the palace. You cross the bridge. You get given a white horse to ride to help you to reach the desert. And you canter away from that village, heading in a straight line off in the direction that the desert is. And you feel like you've been going a very long time, yet the sky just doesn't change, just remains sky blue. And you notice this land does seem to be in a long line, that there are places the land seems to be very wide, but you can notice the vegetation working its way up the sides of the inside of the mountain. And you notice that all along the mountain changes shade to match the blue of the sky. And so you wonder whether if you could somehow rise up, you'd rise up to the top and be able to touch the top as a solid object, even though it looks no different to the sky you see every day. And after many, many hours of riding and stopping, taking breaks, and stopping and sleeping in this daylight, and then continuing to ride some more, you start to notice how warm the air is becoming, that it was already a comfortable and warm temperature when you set off. Now it's a very warm temperature, and you start wondering whether it'll begin to get uncomfortable. And so you continue on, noticing that vegetation thinning out, noticing how the vegetation seems to be becoming more hardy, and you have this sense that there's less water here. And then after what felt like a couple of days riding, you find yourself in a desert. And this desert seems like a sandy desert. And you don't think that the horse will be able to make it much further. There's an area here that's a bit like an oasis near this edge of the desert. So you decide to leave the horse here. And you find that there's a camel drinking from the pool of water. So you head over to that camel. You prepare that camel to be able to be ridden. You let that camel have plenty of water and have some food. And then you continue your journey on that camel. And after some more time, you eventually notice that there seems to be a sandstorm forming in front of you, and you head into that sandstorm, continuing in a straight line, until eventually, after many days of travelling, you find yourself at the wall of this section of this cavern. And you notice that the sandstorm seems to be thicker, more dense in one area, so you decide to head into that dense part of the sandstorm. And you notice that there's a door very similar to the one that you came through, and that the door is open, and that the sandstorm is blowing in through that door. And you walk through the door, finding yourself in a cave. And it's a cave much like the one you walked through, only much shorter. And this cave is full of sand, blasting in. And you hold your arm up in front of you as you push through this sandstorm. You come out of that cave and find that the exit of this mountain here is near a vast desert, and that somehow the heat from this desert and the sand from this desert has been blasting in through the cave, through that open door. And perhaps that has been the cause of the warming that's been melting the palace. So you know that you're going to head back, and you're going to tell the Queen, and you're going to have closed that door again. But you are curious where here is, and you're curious who opened the door and left it open. And as you walk along the edge of the mountain, bracing yourself against that sand, noticing how the wind is so strong it's almost like it makes those sand dunes walk or flow across this desert, almost like slow-moving waves on the ocean, and that they seem to be just covering anything in their path. And you glimpse what looks like the corner of a building, and you walk up to that corner. You dig around, and you find that it is a building. And you manage to find a doorway into this building. And you're confident that you know your way from this doorway back to that cave. You know which route you took. And so you head in through that door into the building. You close that door behind you, and you know that sand will build up again outside that door. But you also know that that sand was loose and easy to move, as it likely will be again if you're not in here too long. And you turn your torch on, and you see the room is empty, but there's a trap door in the middle of the room. And you head over to that trapdoor, lift the trapdoor, descend a ladder down deeper under this building. And as you descend, you notice there's a very slight glow down here, and that once you're down here, the sound of that storm fades away and becomes more distant, and you see someone sleeping on a bed in the corner of this room. And there's a flickering candle on a table near them. And you notice that the blanket they've got, the pillows they've got, look like the softest, most inviting blanket and pillows. You don't want to startle them, but you do want to let them know you're here. So you make a little bit of noise as you carefully walk towards them, and despite not wanting to startle them, they get a little startled. They turn around and see you, and they notice you look friendly, you're smiling and inviting friendship. And you explain there's a storm outside You found this place. You came in here to shelter from the storm. And they say they did the same. That they'd been exploring a cave. They'd found a door. But just as they got the door open, the storm hit. And they couldn't see for the storm through all of that sand. So they felt it wise, having unlocked the door but not yet even opened it, to head out of the cave and find shelter, not knowing what would be further in the cave. And they've been here now for quite a few days. Each time they go upstairs, this storm's still raging. And so they just come back here. They've got enough food and water. And they're just waiting for the storm to pass. And so you sit with them, you talk with them, and you talk about what is the other side of that door, and the problems that have been caused by that door being open, and that you're not going to be able to stay here because you're going to go back through that door and close it behind you to stop any more sand coming through. And you explain that they should join you, they should come with you, that they can exit on the other end of the mountains. And they agree to come with you. And so together, you venture out into that storm, find your way back to the cave, and barely being able to see, you navigate your way through that cave back to that door, pass through the door together, seal it shut behind you. You travel across the desert, back to the horse, and then you get onto the horse, and together with them on the camel, you on the horse, you ride your way back, all the way to that palace. And you notice as you near the palace how you are starting to shiver a little. And so you put some extra layers on to warm up, and you realise that the coolness from the mountains that seems to radiate through, that helps to keep the air at a temperature that helps to make sure that the palace stays frozen, seems to be normalising again. And the two of you travel through this land, back to that palace, meet with the Ice Queen, explain what's going on and what's happened. And you ask about this land, and they say that this land is inside the mountain. It's a very large land, and it's a multi-layered land, that there's more land under the land. And that there's more to this land than you realise. That this land was created at a time of magic. When stuff started happening on Earth that required those who knew magic to create lands within lands, worlds within the earth, and many worlds in the earth were created, almost as if large chunks of the earth are hollow, and they've all developed over hundreds of thousands of years in their own unique way. And the people of the different lands largely keep themselves to themselves. They have exits and ways out if they need them, but everyone's content with where they live and with what they've got. They remember the stories passed down through the generations of what it was like outside of these lands. And that many people have explored and arrived at these lands, have written books which have gone into legends, and some of the lands have gone missing through time. And others have been uninterrupted for thousands of years. And the two of you ask if anyone ever connects with or knows how to connect with those from the other lands. And the Queen says that every land has a palace that's symbolic of where it is. So lands under deserts have sandstone palaces. Lands under high mountains have ice palaces. Lands under the ocean have palaces made of water. And there are different types of palaces for the different lands, but what they all have is a room of deep connection, a room where people can go, they can enter a meditative state, and that room is almost like an orb, that it amplifies the meditative energy, it pulses that out, it creates harmony and a resonance that spreads out from the meditator and then connects with the other orbs in the other palaces. And if there are people meditating in those orbs, it'll connect with those who are meditating, and you then get to share consciousness and communicate almost telepathically with each other. And because you helped the Queen and protected this land, she says that you can have a go in the chamber. You can check out that chamber and see if there's anyone else out there in any of the other lands. And so you head into the chamber. The door closes, and you notice how this chamber is so dark and comforting, and the temperature of this chamber feels almost like you're in a place of nothingness. And you close your eyes just to help yourself focus deeper and more intensely. And you breathe, and with each out-breath you find yourself drifting deeper and deeper into the state. And then you start to have this feeling, almost like there's an electric blue pulse emanating from you with each out-breath. that seems to spread out to the chamber walls and bounce back at you, and then seems to resonate as it bounces back at you. The next breath out seems to send that pulse out even further, and it bounces with more strength until eventually it bounces beyond the walls of the chamber, pulsing beyond the walls of the chamber. And you start to have this sense of almost seeing a representation, almost like an outline or shapes or a wireframe of everything that pulse is passing, almost as if it's radar passing out and showing the shapes of the things it encounters. And yet you have this sense almost like your consciousness is a part of that pulse, seeing the bow wave of the pulse as it spreads out, until eventually you realize that it's pulsing around the globe, and you notice these different pockets of civilizations in mountains, under the sea, under cities, under deserts, under forests, within trees, of different beings. And you see circles in all of these cities, and in some of them you notice that pulses are emanating from those locations towards you. And then, almost in an instant, something shifts that connects all those pulses, a bit like suddenly answering a telephone. And you suddenly have this shared consciousness with the other beings who are all meditating with you. And you begin to telepathically communicate and just instinctively seem to understand each other. And one of them explains that the message is portrayed in the sender's language and with the sender's thoughts. But as it's the message that's the important thing, not the words that are used, and not the language, the receiver receives the message and almost downloads it in their language. And so you telepathically just understand each other. And you start asking them questions about themselves, where they are, what their world is like, whether they ever venture out of their world. And you encounter one person who you find incredibly curious. They seem to live in a world deep under the British countryside, and they call themselves a Knight of the Triangular Table. And you think they seem to have got it wrong. It's supposed to be Knights of the Round Table. And they say, why would you have a round table when there's 3 of you? And they say that for centuries they used to be protectors of the kingdom, and they now just almost ceremoniously carry their swords on them and dress as knights, and have continued the rituals of the three houses meeting at the triangular table. But now all they do is talk, and it's almost more of a social club. And you start to understand how things change with time, how rituals carry on while the reason behind the rituals fades away. When the reasons have faded away into history, and people do those rituals because it brings comfort. It gives a sense of control, a sense of feeling like you're a part of something greater than yourself. And then you connect with someone somewhere else, and they explain that where they are, unlike where you are, where the sky is perpetually blue, where they are, the sky is perpetually as if it's at sunset. And they begin to explain that the skies in each world, the skies in each of these different civilizations, was set to the sky that could be seen by those living on Earth at the time in that location. So at the time that all these worlds appeared underground, those where it was blue sky overhead saw perpetual blue sky. Those where the sun had gone down, where it was night time, had perpetual night. Some perhaps had a perpetual moon in the sky. Others had perpetual dawn or dusk. And each world has the inside of its area almost like a projection that just looks like a real sky, but it's a timeless sky. It's like that moment was captured in time and frozen in time. And those who live in those areas live perpetually in the moment that they became a civilization within the earth. And after exploring consciousness, learning about the different civilizations, you leave the chamber. You meet up with the person who travelled here with you. You leave this area. You leave the mountain. Together you descend the mountain. And you make part of your journey together home before they head off in their direction and you head off in your direction. And once home, you write up what your experience was like. You know that no one would believe your journal if they ever read it. They'll just probably think it's fanciful tales. You mark down some places where you think you might want to try looking for some of those other civilizations based on where you can remember visiting mentally. And then you head to bed and settle down in bed, and comfortably and relaxed you drift and float asleep.